My son-in-law leaned back in his chair the morning after we buried my wife and said, "George, let's be honest with each other. Eleanor is gone. The farm should pass to Sandra, and you should move into something smaller, somewhere manageable. You're 64 years old. How long do you really think you can keep this up?" He smiled when he said it. Not a warm smile. The kind of smile a man gives you when he's already decided the answer to a question he's pretending to ask. I looked at him across the kitchen table. The same kitchen table where Eleanor had rolled out pie crust every Thanksgiving for 38 years. Where she'd helped Sandra with her homework under the yellow overhead light. Where I'd sat across from my wife more mornings than I could count. Drinking coffee before sunrise, not saying much. Just being together in the quiet way that only people who've loved each other for a very long time can be. I looked at my son-in-law and I said, "I appreciate your concern, Marcus." And then I got up and refilled my coffee. I want to tell you about Eleanor first, because nothing that comes after makes any sense without her. We met in the fall of 1986 at a cattle auction outside of Amarillo, Texas. I wasn't even there to buy cattle. My truck had broken down on Route 60, and a man named Dale Hutchins had towed me to his property, which happened to be right next to the auction yard. Eleanor was Dale's niece, visiting from Oklahoma for the weekend. She was 26 years old, wearing a blue flannel shirt, and she was arguing loudly with a man twice her size about the grading standards on a particular Angus heifer. She won the argument. I watched the whole thing. By the time my truck was fixed, I had asked her to dinner. By the following spring, I had asked her something more important. She said yes to both. We built our life on 40 acres outside of Lubbock. I worked construction for the first decade, then transitioned to general contracting as the area developed. Eleanor managed the property, raised Sandra, kept our books, planted a garden that she maintained with the same quiet discipline she applied to everything in her life. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, but she was the kind of person who, when she walked into a room, made the room feel more solid, more real. When Sandra was in her 20s, she brought home Marcus. He was from Dallas, good-looking in the way that men who know they're good-looking tend to be. He worked in commercial real estate, talked fast, always had an opinion. Eleanor pulled me aside after the first dinner and said, very quietly, "Watch that one, George." I told her she was being too hard on him. She smiled and didn't say anything else. That was Eleanor. She planted seeds and she waited. Marcus and Sandra married in 2014. We paid for a significant portion of the wedding because Marcus's parents were not in a financial position to contribute much and because Eleanor believed in starting things right. Over the years that followed, there were small things that nagged at me. Marcus would make comments about the property, about what the land was worth, now that development had been pushing west out of Lubbock, about how it was a shame to have all that value just sitting there, about how a man my age shouldn't be doing his own fence repairs. But he was good to Sandra. At least, he seemed to be. And Sandra loved him. So I kept my mouth shut and I deferred, as I had often done in matters of family, to my wife's quieter wisdom. Eleanor got sick in the spring of 2023. It started as fatigue. Then came the diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The doctors were honest with us, which I will always be grateful for, even though honesty in that moment felt like a physical blow to the chest. We had 14 months. I won't tell you much about those 14 months except to say that they were, in many ways, the most concentrated expression of who Eleanor was as a person. She was not afraid. She was not bitter. She kept her garden. She called Sandra every Sunday. She wrote letters, actual handwritten letters, to people who had mattered to her over the years. Her former students from the Sunday school class she'd taught for a decade, the woman who had been her closest friend in the early years of our marriage, who had since moved to Oregon, her cousin in Albuquerque, who she hadn't spoken to as often as she should have. She also, I would later learn, spent a considerable amount of time on the phone with our attorney, a man named Mr. Calloway, who had handled our affairs for over 20 years. Eleanor passed on a Tuesday in July of last year. It was early morning. The sky outside the window was the particular shade of pink that she had always said was her favorite time of day. I held her hand and I told her everything I needed to tell her. And then she was gone, and the world continued, as it does, with a kind of indifference to grief that I have never quite gotten used to. The funeral was on Friday. Marcus wore an expensive suit. He cried at the service, which I suppose was genuine enough, but I noticed that even at the reception afterward, he was having a quiet conversation near the back fence with a man I didn't recognize. A younger man in a sport coat. They were looking at their phones. I noticed, and I put it away in the back of my mind, and I went back to thanking Eleanor's friends for coming. 3 days after the funeral, Marcus sat across from me at the kitchen table and told me what he thought should happen next. He had a plan. He had clearly been working on it for some time. He spoke about market valuations and land parcels and something he called a structured transition in which Sandra and he would assume ownership of the property and provide me with what he described as a comfortable monthly stipend to cover my living expenses in a smaller place. He mentioned a senior living community near Midland that he had already looked into. Eleanor would have wanted you to be taken care of, he said. This is about making sure that happens. Sandra was sitting next to him. She looked at the table when he said that. Not at me. I noticed that too. The will hasn't been read yet, I said. Of course, Marcus said. We're just thinking ahead. The will reading was scheduled for the following Thursday at Mr. Calloway's office in downtown Lubbock. Marcus drove. Sandra was quiet the whole ride. I watched the flat West Texas landscape pass outside the window and thought about Eleanor, and about the particular look she used to get when she had decided something, a stillness in her eyes, a kind of settled certainty. Mr. Calloway's office was on the 3rd floor of a building on Texas Avenue. His secretary brought us coffee. Marcus sat with his ankle resting on his knee, his posture the easy posture of a man who expects good news. Mr. Calloway came in, set a thick folder on the desk, and put on his reading glasses. He was in his late 60s. A quiet man with a precise way of speaking that I had always trusted. Before we begin, he said, I want to note that Eleanor updated her estate documents in March of this year, approximately 4 months before her passing. All of these revisions were made with full legal counsel and witnessed appropriately. I want that on record. Marcus shifted in his chair. Just slightly. I watched him. Mr. Calloway began to read. The house and the personal property, the furniture, the vehicles, Eleanor's jewelry, those passed to me. Her husband without condition. That much aligned with what Marcus had expected, I suppose, because he nodded slightly when he heard it, as if checking a box. Then Mr. Calloway set down one page and picked up another. The 40-acre parcel and all associated structures, he said, including the outbuildings, the water rights, and the mineral rights, were transferred by Eleanor into a revocable living trust in March of this year. The trust became irrevocable upon her death. The named trustee is George. He looked at me over his glasses. That's you, of course. You hold full authority over the trust and its assets for the duration of your life. Marcus sat forward. And after George, Mr. Calloway looked at him for a moment. I'm getting there. He returned to the document. Upon George's death or voluntary dissolution of the trust, the assets transfer to the Eleanor May Briggs Family Land Preservation Fund, a charitable land trust which Eleanor established in February of this year in partnership with the Lubbock County Agricultural Preservation Coalition. The land is to be maintained as working agricultural land in perpetuity and may not be subdivided, developed commercially, or sold to private parties. The room was very quiet. Sandra put her hand over her mouth. Marcus's jaw tightened. He was doing the calculation I could see him doing, the same calculation he had clearly already done many times in his head, and now the numbers weren't adding up. He stopped. Restarted. That means the land can't be sold, subdivided, or transferred to private ownership, Mr. Calloway said. That's correct. But the value, Marcus said. The land alone is worth. The land is worth considerably, Mr. Calloway agreed pleasantly. And it will remain so, in trust, benefiting agricultural conservation in this county for generations. Eleanor was very clear about her intentions. Marcus turned to me. Did you know about this? I knew Eleanor was working on her estate plan, I said. The details were hers to decide. You could contest it, Marcus said. His voice had a different quality now. The easy confidence was gone. Something harder underneath. She was ill. Her judgment. "I'd be very careful with that line of reasoning," Mr. Calloway said. He wasn't unkind, but he was firm. Eleanor was evaluated by her physician and found to be fully competent at the time these documents were executed. She was methodical, she was clear, and she was consistent across multiple meetings with my office. There is no basis for a competency challenge. Marcus stood up. He was trying to look composed. He wasn't. "I need a moment," he said, and walked out of the office. Sandra and I sat in the chairs across from Mr. Calloway. She was crying quietly. I reached over and took her hand. "Your mother loved you very much," I said. "I know," she said. "I know she did, Daddy." We sat like that for a moment. Then Mr. Calloway cleared his throat gently. "There's one more item," he said. "Eleanor left something specifically for you, George. She asked that it be given to you in private, but she did not specify when. I'll leave that to your discretion." He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. My name was written on it in Eleanor's handwriting. I put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, against my chest. In the parking garage, Marcus was on the phone when Sandra and I came down. He saw us and ended the call. He looked at me with an expression that I had seen on men before, usually in business disputes. The expression of a man who has realized he has lost something and is deciding how much he cares about the relationship with the person who beat him. "This isn't over," he said. "Marcus," Sandra said quietly, "you're 64 years old, George. What are you going to do with 40 acres by yourself?" "Farm it," I said. "Same as I always have." He shook his head. He got in the car. Sandra looked at me with an expression that was complicated in the way that expressions involving love and disappointment and loyalty to two different people tend to be. "Ride with us?" she asked. "I'll call Dale's boy for a ride," I said. "You go ahead." She hugged me. She held on for a moment longer than a quick hug requires. Then she got in the car and they drove away. I stood in the parking garage for a while. Then I took out Eleanor's envelope. I leaned against the concrete pillar, and I opened it. Her handwriting was slightly shakier than it had been in earlier years, but still distinctly hers. Neat, deliberate, each letter formed with care. "George, if you're reading this, then Mr. Calloway has done his job, and I've done mine. I want to explain some things, because I know you, and I know you'll have questions, and I know you'll want to think well of everyone if you possibly can. Marcus has been borrowing against the farm." I stopped. I read the line again. In 2021, he had Sandra co-signed 2 refinancing documents on the smaller parcel, the 15 acres on the northeast corner. Sandra believed she was signing routine bank paperwork related to their own home equity. I don't believe she understood what she was actually signing. I discovered this in January of last year, when I found the documents in a folder Sandra left here during Christmas. I took photographs before she took them home. I consulted with Mr. Calloway. He consulted with a property attorney. The documents were legally problematic on several grounds, including the fact that my signature was required and was forged. Yes, George. Forged. I did not sign those papers. I have never spoken to Marcus about this. Mr. Calloway has the photographs. He has already been in contact with the county assessor's office and with the title company. This matter will be referred to the appropriate authorities at the time of his choosing, per my instructions, which were to wait until after the will reading, so that Sandra would know about the trust before this information came to light. I need you to understand something about Sandra. She is not complicit. I am as certain of this as I am of anything. She is a girl who loves her husband and trusts him, and has never in her life had a reason to believe that the people who love her would use her. She is going to need her father. The land is yours while you live, and it goes to the Conservation Trust when you don't, because I know what that land means to you, and I know what would happen to it if it could be sold. You would never forgive yourself. This way, neither of us has to. I planted the pink climbing rose on the south fence in 1994. Water it in August when it's dry. It'll come back every spring without much help. Most things do. I love you, George. 38 years wasn't enough. I'll see you on the other side of it. Ellie. I folded the letter. I put it back in the envelope. I put the envelope back in my jacket pocket, over my heart, and I stood in that parking garage in downtown Lubbock for a long time, not doing anything at all, just standing. When I was ready, I called Dale's son, who came and got me and drove me home without asking too many questions, which is what a good neighbor does. I won't tell you everything that happened in the weeks that followed, but I'll tell you the shape of it. Mr. Calloway referred the forged documents to the county district attorney's office on the Monday after the will reading. The matter was simultaneously reported to the Texas Department of Savings and Mortgage Lending. I was notified, as Eleanor's surviving spouse, and the party whose property had been affected, but the machinery of that process moved without me. I did not make calls. I did not give interviews. I weeded the garden and repaired the section of fence on the east pasture that had been bothering me for 2 months. Marcus, it emerged through the process, had been using the potential equity in the northeast parcel as collateral in a commercial real estate venture that had gone sideways. He had needed the collateral quickly and had believed, apparently, that a 40-acre farm outside of Lubbock would eventually come to him one way or another, which made the paperwork feel like a formality. He had not counted on Eleanor. He had not counted on Eleanor finding the documents, or on Eleanor having 20 more months to do something about it, or on Eleanor being Eleanor. Sandra called me the Wednesday of that week. She had found out. She didn't cry on the phone, which surprised me. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Mama knew." "Yes," I said. "She never said anything to me." "She wanted you to know about the trust first," I said. "She wanted you to understand what she had done for the land, and for me, before she asked you to carry anything else." Sandra was quiet again. Then she said, "That's so her, Daddy. That is so completely her. I know. What do I do now? That's between you and God and eventually between you and a good attorney," I said. "But whatever you decide, I am your father, and that does not change. You call me whenever you need to. You come home whenever you want to. The door is open." She came home the following weekend. She came alone. She helped me weed the garden, and we ate dinner at the kitchen table, and she slept in her old room. And in the morning we had coffee before sunrise, and didn't talk very much, just sat in the quiet together. On the Sunday she left. She stood at the door for a moment and looked around the house the way you look at a place you have known your whole life, taking inventory of everything that is still in its right place. "Mama's roses are going to need water," she said. "I know," I said. "I've got it. There are things I want to say to any man or woman out there who is at a similar crossroads, who has just buried the person they built their life with, and who is sitting across a table from someone who has already decided what your grief is worth to them. Your grief is not a negotiating position. Your age is not a liability. And the people who love you really love you. They don't stop working on your behalf just because they're no longer here to stand beside you." Eleanor was not a loud woman. She never raised her voice in an argument, never made speeches, never needed an audience for her principles. But she spent the last 14 months of her life, while managing her own illness with a kind of grace I still cannot fully comprehend, making absolutely certain that the life we had built together would be protected. That I would be protected, that even Sandra, who had unknowingly been used, would be given the chance to know the truth with enough support around her to survive it. She thought of everything. She always had. Marcus is facing a civil suit related to the forged documents and a separate matter with the state licensing board regarding his real estate practices. I don't follow the details closely. I have a farm to run. The northeast pasture is doing well this year. I rotated the grazing pattern the way I had been planning to do for several years, and the grass is coming in thicker. The outbuilding roof needed replacing, which I did myself over 3 weekends in September, which I mention only because my son-in-law told me I was too old to be doing my own fence repairs, and a man has to know his own limits, but he also has to know what he's still capable of. I am 64 years old. I get up before dawn. I drink my coffee at the kitchen table where my wife rolled out pie crust for 38 years. I water the pink climbing roses on the south fence when August gets dry. And every morning, when the sky turns that particular shade of pink just before sunrise, I sit for a moment and say good morning to Eleanor. I don't know what comes after this life, But I know what Eleanor believed, and I know that whatever is on the other side, she has already thought it through, already made the arrangements, already prepared for every contingency. She is probably already waiting, patient and certain and quietly pleased with how things turned out. She was the smartest person I ever knew. She was my wife, and I am still, every single morning, grateful for that. If you've stayed with me this long, thank you. These stories, these real moments from real lives matter because they remind us that love is not passive. It is not just feeling. It is action. It is planning. It is the pink climbing rose, planted in 1994, that comes back every spring because someone who loved you made sure it would. Take care of the people you love while you can, and trust that the ones who truly loved you have already taken care of you in ways you may not yet fully understand. God bless.